Okay, so I want to hear about Harmontown. I know the story of this. I'm familiar with the guy profiled because I watch his television show, Community. But I'm really curious about the documentary.
Sure, I'll start, I guess.
Sure.
So the documentary is about Dan Harmon and his. As Andy mentioned, he's a showrunner or a writer and producer of television, including Community and other things. But he also has a podcast, and so I guess the podcast started off as an idea of going to a stand-up comedy club and just having a conversation, not having anything prepared, but just having this monologue / dialogue / open to the audience. And apparently it has become quite a success. I don't listen to the podcast myself. But then he decided then to take this podcast on the road. And so he did a tour of stand-up clubs and maybe other venues with the podcast. But I think it's as much about an exploration of himself as it is about this road movie, if you will. But for however he does it, he's able to connect with people extremely well, and he's able to build this feeling of confidence that people can do anything. People can get on stage with him. People can tell their story. And even after the film, during the Q&A, people were just unloading their stories, these very, very personal stories. So somehow he has a way to connect with people in these interactions on the podcast and live to where people just really love what he's doing. And so much so that along the course of the way, somebody from the audience went to one of these podcast shows with the sole purpose of trying to get Dan Harmon to play, was it Dungeons and Dragons with him. And they did it live, but then it became part of their shtick and part of their show. So now this young man, I can't remember his name.
Spencer.
Spencer is part of the Harmontown podcast. So anyway, he connects with people really well, and I think that came across really well in the documentary. But again, it's an exploration of himself, his insecurities, his personal struggles, his creative struggles, and all of that comes out in the film as well. I think it's a really good portrait of an artist. And I'll say that because I compare it to another film that the director did who, I don't have his name here. It is Neil Berkeley.
Yeah.
He directed another small documentary called Beauty is Embarrassing, which is about another creator, a visual artist, who became famous for creating or helping create all of the sets for Pee-wee's Big Adventure. But another story of an artist and kind of the struggles of reconciling a creative mind with the mind that needs to get you through your daily life. And so I think this film did this as well.
Yeah, and I mean, a big part of the film too is that this is he decides to go on tour pretty much after being fired from Community. So this was kind of a way for him to not necessarily run away from that, but just to sort of shift gears and kind of take this whole thing that I think he gets a lot out of every week. Because essentially, I think what they did was they eventually moved it to a comic book store. And so, it has sort of that following of sort of that geek or nerd following. I'm not a consistent listener of the show, but I have heard a number of episodes that people have recommended where, people just sort of, he just talks about what's going on and sort of brings people up and they talk and they just sort of roll off of that. It's a very, very interesting format, I think, sort of like an open forum of problems, or just fun, poking fun of certain things. But you definitely get the understanding that he feels somewhat uncomfortable with fame. Right. And I think the movie does a really good job at portraying that. The self-deprecating humor is very it is not few and far between. I mean, he definitely goes after himself and other people around him. And also sort of shows a little bit of how he's had problems with working with other, visionaries or comedians in the past. You see a lot of comedians like one-on-one, like looking right into the camera saying like, this is why, I either like the guy or I don't like the guy, or this is why he's brilliant, or this is why things didn't work. There's a lot of recognizable people. Chris Hardwick, Sarah Silverman, Jack Black. It just goes on and on and on. I mean, these people that have obviously worked with him and gotten something out of that relationship. So, it jumps around a little bit, but it's all very, well woven together into sort of showcasing perhaps why he is where he is now. Because,
Right.
I mean, basically, I think that if he had never sort of had the issues with working with others that he's had, the podcast may have never happened, you
Right.
know. It may have never helped certain people, come to terms with certain things in their life.
It doesn't pull any punches.
No.
It shows the genius of this man, and clearly, all of these other comedians respect his genius.
Yeah.
But it also shows that, he could be, possibly horrible
Sure.
to work with or horrible to live with. I mean, his girlfriend is part of the documentary as well, and there are some really tense, uncomfortable moments between the two of them, and in the Q&A as well. I mean, she said, this is our life. I mean, we didn't want to hide anything. But, this man is sometimes very difficult to live with, but he's also my hero.
Yeah.
And he's, the most inspiring man that I've ever met. So I think it's a great, portrait in that way of showing the good and the bad of this guy. And clearly a genius. I mean, he's on tour doing this podcast, and he has deadlines with Fox and other studios to have new shows written or and it seems like overnight he can create something that gets accepted. Just overnight. So truly, I think it's a nice portrait of this.
Yeah,
this man.
and speaking to sort of the pilot deadlines that he was facing, it's just, you hear these phone conversations with these higher executives like, well, we didn't like this, or this, and you can clearly tell that he's just like, you don't get it, and but he's still writing the the notes down and kind of brushes them off. But you can tell that, I mean, it affects him. I mean, these people critiquing his work. And then there's that nice moment where he sort of has his girlfriend, like he says, okay, this is what they say. Here are all the problems with it.
Right.
What do you think we can do to, fix this? And so that's nice that their relationship gets to the point in the movie where they can sort of, there's collaboration because, you kind of get this sense that, he does maybe appear to be holier than thou when it comes to others around him. But I really sort of like how everything's, information and sort of the comedy's woven throughout the film. It kind of reminds me a little bit of a concert film in a sense. So like you see these parts that are obviously on the podcast, but then there's an explanation of where this stuff came from, like these strange topics or these weird things that happen. And of course, so he's going from place to place to place, and some really bad things happen at the show before, and he's clearly going to talk about it the next night.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to think that if you were that person sitting in that audience the night after something, crazy happened, at that moment they had no idea why certain things happened. Well, now there's these answers, sort of where that came from. I mean, you can go back and listen to the show the night before, but even then you still have no idea why he's doing certain things on stage. Whereas this gives a really good example of where all this sort of stuff, this content, I think, is coming from.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of nice, and everyone's given their moment to shine in the film, and I appreciated that.
Yeah.
But a very entertaining film. I mean, I don't think you even have to even know what Community is to have some sort of connection with this film. I think it does a really good job at sort of getting everybody involved and sort of going forward from there.
Yeah.
Right
Same here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see it. It was in that block of Space Station 76 where I literally couldn't see anything for like 5 hours except for Space Station 76.
And the other really interesting thing was right before we saw the film, we actually got to see sort of the live podcast they were doing, just a little bit of it, maybe like 15 minutes that they were doing at South by.
Yeah.
Which was, so it was like, I think without that, I think we might have sort of taken a little bit longer to get into the swing of things.
Yeah.
But they were doing it right then and there. And it was just like, okay, I get how just instant, they jump on stage and they just go.
It was definitely a good primer, and even but it also it showed us how he connects with an audience, because there were audience members at the podcast that he connected with in the Q&A, and it's really incredible how he builds the trust of his audience, because I think he bears it all. He bears himself on stage, and I liked it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Great. All right. A Place for Film is recorded at WFIU Studios in Bloomington, Indiana.